Hey everyone, it's Movie Otaku here to finally deliver my tribute to Béla Tarr. His death came unexpectedly to me considering his age, but he'd apparently been suffering from serious illness for a long time, and my heart goes out to all who are connected to him. He had retired from feature filmmaking in 2011 after the release of The Trojan Horse, but since then he was active in teaching film at his film school and being in the film community. To briefly talk about his legacy, he was known as a master of slow cinema. While you may embrace or hate the name slow cinema, there's no denying that he was a pioneer of that type of film. His is a name that carries a lot of implications, representing one extreme end of the cinema spectrum, almost like people bring up his name to indicate the challenge and difficulty that taking the next step as a cinephile means. Well, I went on a marathon of all his movies in order to make this video, including watching his first three movies for the first time, and I think he's more accessible than that, or at least his reputation makes him seem more intimidating than he is. His movies are slow, but not uneventful, and they're always beautiful to look at. He was one of the best creators of long takes in film. Rarely show offy, instead with very slow movements and choreography so fluid that many times it's easy to not realize that you've just been watching a 5 minute take, for example. He was a master of form, as well as atmosphere. When one thinks of desolate, rainy environments in movies, it's hard not to think of Béla Tarr. And this external atmosphere matches that of his characters' internal lives in a way that really puts you in their shoes. Some call him pessimistic, but if this is true, he's pessimistic at the world and its systems, but never in terms of humanity. If I had to say what his films mean to me thematically, it would be that they're about the rough situations people find themselves in, whether they be political, economic, or environmental, and how we deal with the struggle. Unfortunately for many of his characters, it's a losing battle, but in a way they encourage us to find the beauty in the uphill battle we have to climb as people. That's what he means to me, but I know he means a great deal to many people, philosophically and otherwise, so let me know what he means to you in the comments down below. Now, before I start with my ranking, I want to briefly yet sincerely acknowledge his collaborators, because I'm sure he'd be the first to argue that his wonderful movies wouldn't have been possible without these people. First and foremost, his wife, Agnes Ranuski. She was not only his longtime editor, but also his co-director on his last three movies. Just as important was Laszlo Krasznahorkai, the Nobel Prize-winning author who wrote two books that Béla Tarr based movies on, with Shotantengol leading to the adaptation of the same name, and The Melancholy of Resistance leading to Werkmeister Harmonies. He also co-wrote the screenplays for all five of Béla Tarr's films from Damnation on, which is a period he's most famous for. If it weren't for him, I highly doubt Béla Tarr would have turned into the filmmaker he became. Finally, the composer Mihai Vig scored all his movies from Almanac of Fall On, and a large part of his movie's atmosphere and power can be attributed to his wonderful music. Anyway, let's get into my ranking of his 10 feature films, starting with my least favorite Béla Tarr movie. This was honestly difficult to rank almost the whole way through, but my least favorite was, frankly, as clear as soon as I watched it. At number 10, I have The Outsider, Béla Tarr's second film, and the first of three is shot in color. One thing that might be surprising about Tar is that his first three movies were totally different in style from what came later. He's most famous as a master of glacial long takes, but he started his career with what I like to call his documentary fiction trilogy, which utilized tight close ups and a handheld camera to tell stories of ordinary people having money and relationship problems. These movies can basically be boiled down to a series of conversations, and this movie, easily my least favorite of the trilogy, has the least interesting ones. It also has a lead who frankly isn't too compelling, and since I'm not really invested in him or his situation, the film has a sort of random quality as he talks to a bunch of different people. It's not without strong moments. I really like the scene where the lead's wife is arguing with him while he's on stage with music blasting in the background. She has to shout everything in order to be heard, which makes for a tense and memorable scene. I also love a side character who always has interesting stories to tell about classical composers. But these elements I enjoy basically feel like the exception to the rule and move that didn't really do anything for me. It might be his least well known feature, and I'd argue that it's for Tar completionists only. Coming in at number 9, we now go to the second half of his career, the period that Tar is certainly most famous and influential for. The five movies here are all technical masterclasses, but the one that's easily my least favorite is The Man from London. It's kind of the black sheep of Tar's filmography. It's based on a French novel and set in France, contains an international cast including Tilda Swinton on top of a number of his regular actors, and prominently features dubbing that take you out of the social realism a bit. None of these things are my problem with the movie, though. My problem is that I feel like it takes its relatively simple film noir story and plays it at slow motion to little benefit, in my opinion. I say this as someone who enjoys the slow nature of his other films, so it's not like I'm against this style of filmmaking. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing a Béla Tarr tribute. I think the difference is that his other slow works from this period carry a lot of power from the environment, a sense of isolation, and a cosmic weight that make them about way more than the confines of the plot. I can't find that power in The Man from London, so it just plays it slow. Don't get me wrong, there are memorable things in here. I enjoy when the focus shifts to the protagonist and his family. The scene where he forcibly removes his daughter from her job is impactful with the shop owner's facial expressions. I like when he later buys her an expensive fur at the store. And I like the shot that focuses on her as her parents fight at the dinner table. My favorite shot is a 7-minute one in the bar that starts with the father and daughter talking with some slow accordion music in the background. But as the shot continues, we move over to these two talking. We go back to these two. And then in the end, as they leave, the camera pans to this, and the music wonderfully speeds up to an up-tempo dance. This has a kind of humorous spontaneity I love about Béla Tarr, where one of the guys randomly has a pool ball on his head, and the other one is randomly holding a chair. But I also love that the scene is clearly a tribute to the drunken bar dance in Chantant Tango. Those two are Mr. Hollish and Mr. Schmidt from that movie, in which Mr. Schmidt was similarly balancing bread on his head. The accordion music is also similarly very catchy and exciting. Even from earlier in the shot, there's Mrs. Schmidt from Chantant Tango, and if you add the bartender and the daughter to the mix, this becomes a certifiable reunion. I would have happily watched many more minutes of the shot, but of course, it's not enough to make up for a lot of the rest of the movie, which I wouldn't necessarily call boring, but which I would just call less inspired. The great slow long take choreography is there, but the impact isn't. Moving on, and from here, I think all of his works are very strong, so it brings a heavy heart to go to number 8, where I have Almanac of Fall, or Autumn Almanac as it's also known. This is a very unique entry in Tara's work because it represents the exact midpoint between his two styles. On the one hand, it's quite literally a series of conversations between various members of this house, resembling more of a Bergman-esque chamber play. And on the other hand, it ditches the handheld documentary realism of his early trilogy for a much more formal style that at times strongly resembles his later style. The camera is beautifully glacial and almost always in motion. The takes are long and more choreographed, and we're introduced to Mihai Vig as a composer. But this isn't merely a transitional work, it's entirely its own due to cinematography. This was Tar's last feature shot in color, and his expressionistic color lighting schemes are captivating, making this rundown apartment the film's only setting, a dark, dreamlike world. Coupled with occasional flights of fancy, like this high angle shot of shaving, and this shot below a glass floor as one of the characters is attacked, and you have a movie that calls Raul Ruiz to mind, something that not many other movies can claim to do. Despite the great formal work here, the reason why this ranks on the lower end is partially not the movie's fault. Belatar's movies are infamous for poor subtitle translations, and because this movie's his talkiest, it hurts this one the most, I'm afraid. A lot of the dialogue resembles mazes, which sometimes challenge you, or me at least, to follow exactly what they're saying, and as a result, the story, character dynamics, and themes suffer. It's unfortunate, but nonetheless, I enjoy this movie as a piece of art, and as Tar shifting his filmmaking style in an exciting way. Coming in at an affectionate number 7, I put Bela Tarr's debut, Family Nest. The first of his documentary fiction trilogy, as I call it. This is a series of conversations, closer to Cassavetes than Raw Ruiz, revolving around this family unit, mainly including the patriarch of the family, who's very opinionated and argumentative, the son who just returned home, and his wife. They and more all live in a small apartment in the city, and throughout the film, many tensions arise within the unit. All the while, the young couple desperately want to move out of the house, but run into problems as a request for housing is not top priority for the government. I greatly enjoyed this movie for its claustrophobia. This movie stars a long tradition of tight, long close ups, and how real it all feels. I said it's basically a series of conversations, and they're all compelling and keep the drama entertaining. When these familial arguments aren't happening, Tar includes dramatic and unexpected turns, like the moralistic father in a bar trying to seduce a woman, or most powerfully, how the married son, who usually seems like a good guy, is seen assaulting a woman along with his brother early in the film. It's also shot very much like a documentary, to the point where the final 17 minutes are basically documentary interviews of the characters with the filmmaker. It's definitely Béla Tarr's Ross movie, a portrait of what life was like at this time and place that I enjoyed a lot. And keeping with this type of movie, at number 6, I have The Prefab People, his final documentary fiction feature. It was a tough call whether I prefer this or his first movie, but I'll go with this because it's a tighter, more focused, and more structured effort. It's about a couple, and at the beginning of the movie, the husband walks out on his wife and baby, possibly for good, and the rest of the movie is a flashback that led up to that moment. It has his usual style at the time of claustrophobic close ups, but I think the thing that really puts us over the top is the writing, especially for the wife. I'm not sure if I've ever seen a more realistic and authentic portrayal of a wife's frustration with her husband than in this movie, and it lends the movie such interest. Most of the problems revolve around the taking care of their child, and the fact that the husband seems to be slacking in that department. She really lets him have it, but it never feels forced or artificial. Her dialogue comes from a deep place of pent up frustration, and the fact that Béla Tarr had the insight, as a man, to write a wife that sees directly through the husband and doesn't put up with any funny business is a minor miracle worth as much, in a way, as any sophisticated long take he could dream up. Whether or not you think that the wife's constant grievances and complaints are too much or justified, the fact is that the husband got driven away by something, and the movie is a great study on the dynamics at play that led to the unfortunate incident. Now, I should say that multiple cuts of the movie exist, and the only one I have access to is the shortest version, which runs at a brisk 76 minutes, which surely helps give the movie its tightness. But as it stands, The Prefab People is debatably the best of his documentary fiction trilogy, and though it's a close call, it's my favorite as of now, on first viewing. Next, I have what I'm sure a number of Béla Tarr fans will protest. But just remember, I'm not ranking this based on the director's best or most representative works, only my favorites, as in more or less the ones I enjoy the most. If you adore this movie, as many fans do, then please, all the power to you. But for me, number 5 is The Turn Horse, Tarr's final film. I'll first say that, at its best, this is really impactful stuff. It's tarred as most apocalyptic, being about a father and daughter who live in this remote hut in the middle of nowhere and spend their lives doing a handful of routines, all while a windy storm rages outside. There are a few variations here and there throughout the film, like this neighbor who stops by and gives a dire monologue, and this band of gypsies that take some of the water to the father's anger. But for the most part, it's grueling daily life with no signs of relief or pleasure. I guess the only thing they do to keep themselves entertained is to stare out the window. And there are two shots of this in particular that are some of the best images Tar ever shot. This is him at his most extreme, the closest to death, as well as his slowest. Believe it or not, there are only 30 shots in this 2.5 hour movie, and much of the time is spent in the routines. There's the dressing, the undressing, the shoveling of horse manure, the pulling of the cart and or horse to and fro, the eating of potatoes, their only food source, and the taking of the buckets out to the well. It's very similar to Jean Dielman in this sense, and I say this is even more demanding. I can't say it's ever boring, but it comes awfully close at times, though I can see that that's what the movie is partially about. Tara wants us to feel the dread that they're feeling, and for us to be completely transported to this world, and he does just that. It might not be his most enjoyable on a moment to moment basis, but it adds up to a grand, unforgettable vision that's a fitting end to his career, as well as his life. Moving on to number 4, I have the first movie he made with his signature style, Damnation. Having gone on a chronological marathon of all of Béla Tarr's movies, it's hard not to be impressed by the leap he made with this movie. We're familiar with his style from other works of his, but as a first one, it feels like such a unique and striking vision. It's one of desolate landscapes, rain, fog, and dogs, shot with both stillness and a slow moving camera in high contrast black and white. We're invited to simply look and observe for much of the movie in a way that was only hinted at before, such as in the first shot of the carts moving along, and the camera gradually pulls back to reveal the head that's been staring at them. We get great shots in bars, both full and empty, where we're simply asked to soak in the atmosphere. The subject is about a loner who's in love with a married woman, which is indeed a very lonely place to be in, so the stark atmosphere perfectly complements the whole mood of the piece. You get the feeling that he wanted to make a tribute of sorts to film noir, and just about every way this captures the spirit of one, but makes it entirely his own in its setting and its many slow sequences with no plot progression. But there are times when it breaks the starkness and stillness and relishes in a crowded dance hall towards the end. Yet we see isolation within it, and not just from the main character. This makes it a richer movie than simply showing depression, and speaks to Tar's view of humanity being not purely one of pessimism. It's not perfect. There are occasionally dialogue sequences that go on a bit too long for my taste, that aren't really so eventful in terms of the camera. But for about 75% of the time, this is an original and essential art house experience. Next, coming in at number 3, is what's probably my most controversial choice. Some might not like that it's placed this high, and some might not like that I'm including it on this list at all. But after struggling to rank all the movies on this list, I think it fits very nicely here. It's Macbeth. This is a made for TV production, but is 62 minutes long, qualifying it as a feature in my eyes. Because it's so short, I don't know how it holds up as an adaptation of Macbeth, but frankly, I don't care so much. This is a superb technical achievement, and it holds a distinguished place in film history as the first movie done in essentially one take. Yes, technically it's two shots, but the first is a 5-minute pre credit sequence, and the 57 minutes that follow is a single take. This is 20 years before Russian Ark, and with it, I think Béla Tarr does no less than reinvent the art of filmmaking by turning what's probably a very small location, allegedly a cellar, into a grand stage, and compressing time and space into a single, uncut camera move. It's true that a theatrical production does something similar, with a single location and scenes changing before our eyes, but I'd argue that when watching a play, we can tell when a scene starts and ends due to the set changes and the like. But here it's one continuous flow and a radical compression of how a story can be told. Tar does this by using what was his strength up until this point, claustrophobic close ups, to his advantage, having us focus on the foreground, and like a magic trick, fluidly changing to a new scene in said foreground, or pulling the rug from under us to introduce a new development in the background, all while the real time nature of the take isn't interrupted. The result is very exciting, even if the Shakespearean Old English dialogue can be a barrier to complete narrative understanding, at least for me. Add to that the video cinematography and the coziness of the single setting, and this is not only one of my favorite Béla Tarr movies, but a very underrated chapter in film history. I originally had this at around the midpoint of my list, but in the end, I couldn't deny its high position. Another movie I couldn't deny is what I have as my second favorite Béla Tarr movie, and that's Werkmeister Harmonies. I hate to admit it, but it's taken me a long time to come around on this movie. I don't know why, but I have been more or less indifferent about it even after 2 or 3 viewings, but it's with this latest viewing for this video that I became a fan. Part of the reason is that I feel like this has more resonance and relevance today. This is certainly Tar's most overtly political movie, at least of his late work, and as such, it's easy to connect with our current world. Without getting into politics here, it does feel like civilization is collapsing in more ways than one, and that's exactly the subject of this movie. It's about a society that's falling apart under the influence of a figure who we only see in shadow, and it's about this mild-mannered newspaper delivery man who navigates it all. Of course, the movie has striking long takes, but the thing I remember the most is the faces. We see hundreds of blank faces standing around the square. We see them again as the numbers increase along with the unrest. Then we see them marching in unison, and finally terrorizing this hospital for no apparent reason. The indifference in everyone's faces clearly reminds me of Robert Bresson, and it's haunting because they seem to passively and blindly lose their humanity just because of some pathetic figure we never see. But the movie is not just political. The great opening scene of the film, a 10-minute take of the protagonist arranging everybody in this bar like the solar system, sets up the rest of the movie to be based in the cosmic, expanding the scope of the movie to not just be about this societal problem, but about humanity itself. It's a movie that had to grow on me, and I expect there's still growing to be done, but it's enough for me to easily put this at number 2. Which leads me to number 1, and this one isn't close. My favorite Béla Tarr movie is Shatan Tangol. It's his most famous slash infamous movie due to its runtime that's just shy of 7.5 hours, and it can be said to be a kind of cinephile's rite of passage, like a final boss of cinema. This was actually the first movie by him I saw, and the first couple of times it defeated me, but I stuck with it, and it's one of the best examples of a movie which I learned to love. If Damnation was his first go at a new style, Shatan Tangol is him diving off the deep end and fully plunging into this form. If you thought the takes were long before, you ain't seen nothing yet. If you thought that world was bleak, wait till you see this. If you thought his camera moves were impressive, get a load of what he pulls off here. He took years of his life to adapt a book not carelessly, but in a way that uses over 7 hours to be as faithful as possible. Apparently, I haven't read it. He shot for the stars and got there. I think I can boil down my love for it to a couple of reasons. In my mind, this movie is about experience itself as a subject, as Tar uses time and duration to make us feel the weight of not just being with the characters, but actually being them. We feel the length of their tedious activities, we get absorbed in the world, and we get ample time to contemplate. The movie gives us two kinds of experiences, one of community and one of isolation. And this is one of the most brilliant examinations there is about what it's like to be with others and to be by oneself. The other reason I love this movie is that it's actually very funny. It took me a while, but I finally realized that it is indeed a very straight faced satire on this collection of people, while also showing a certain dignity that they have in the face of a hopeless future. This is impossible to do justice to in a short time, so if you want to know my more detailed thoughts about this movie, check out my last video before this one, where I attempted to give it its due as my 23rd favorite movie of all time. But in terms of Béla Tarr's career as a whole, this masterwork is what he'll be most remembered for as his crowning achievement, and I couldn't agree more. It's my favorite movie by him. So there you have it. That's my ranking of Béla Tarr's movies. Thanks for watching. If you agree or disagree with anything I had to say, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, and I'd love to know how you guys would rank Béla Tarr's movies. It's always sad to lose a great filmmaker, but we can all celebrate him by watching and talking about his movies. See you next time.